It's a debate that never seems to go away. We're talking about tipping today, or tipflation. According to a Pew Research study, now more than ever, more Americans are being asked to tip service workers. Joining us to share some insight on the topic and consumer trends is Mark Lee. Good morning to you. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thank you. Happy 4th.
Happy almost 4th.
Okay.
Yeah, happy 4th, though.
Right.
I guess you could say it early.
Yeah.
But you are an adjunct professor and you study consumer trends. So this is really a perfect topic for you to break down. So what is tipflation and how has it evolved in the last few years?
Yeah, tipflation, tipflation is a phenomenon where people feel like they constantly have to give a tip for whatever that service might be. Historically, you went in and you would tip whenever you wanted to tip. But now what's happening is today, people feel as though they must provide a tip for whatever that service might be. And how has it evolved over the years? Over the last couple of years, this actually goes back to COVID. And this is where service workers certainly were being at home. They were losing business. Customers were not coming into the store. They were not coming into the restaurants, for example. And so a lot of the restaurants started to make you feel guilty if you did not tip, so to speak. So that phenomenon started really 3 or 4 years ago. It's really grown over the last several years.
Right, when they qualified as frontline workers. You know, they were really out there interacting with people. Many would say risking their lives to do this. But I feel like it almost started before COVID, because before we saw these prompts that you're faced with when you go to a coffee shop, for instance, and you go to pay and it asks you if you want to tip. That was happening before COVID.
It was happening before COVID, but it was accentuated through COVID. Because again, a lot of people were not seeing the same number of customers going through the restaurants, for example, and the employees were losing money. Remember, a lot of them are just getting minimum wage, and I say that very respectfully. And if you're in the service industry, you're actually getting less than minimum wage. So they rely very heavily upon the tips, certainly to make ends meet. The problem is that from a consumer perspective, consumers are starting to feel challenged. They're starting to get frustrated. They feel as though they always have to tip. It's no longer an option, but they feel an obligation to do so.
And as we're seeing inflation and the impacts that has on people's pockets, I mean, it's also stressing financially, all these tips.
Absolutely. If you look at you mentioned reference earlier, for example, when you go to a carryout, they have that iPad. They flip that iPad around. Right? You're just picking up something. They say, hey, do you want to give a 0% tip? Do you want to give a 15%, a 20, upwards of 25%? And so to a lot of consumers are saying, wait a minute, I want to have the option of giving whatever I want to give. So now we have this thing called inflation. Now we have tipflation, and consumers are beginning to feel that much more stress. I just came back from up north over the weekend, this past weekend, just get a chance for a brief getaway. And I went to a couple of restaurants. And here's the funny thing. It was not funny, but I picked up some food. They flipped the iPad around. My first inclination was, sure, I want to leave a tip. But then I started thinking about it. I said, I'm the one that's getting in the car. I'm the one that's driving over here. No disrespect to people serving me in that space, but it's my dollars, my resources. Give me the option of providing that tip for the service workers.
I also wonder if just the mentality of being on vacation, you just feel like in a more giving mood, right? It depends on kind of where you're meeting people in their week. But I did a story on this last summer. I went around the city of Ann Arbor and I asked both consumers and employees how they feel about tipping, what their experience is with tipping. And in most cases, people know. Employees know if you're tipping or not. They can see the feedback when you hit that screen. So I wonder if consumers knew that you're tipping or not, if that would also sway the behavior a little bit.
I think a lot of customers don't know that the employees might know. And I'm not necessarily sure that it would sway the consumers' overall opinions. Because again, I think that people are getting more and more frustrated. And again, let's talk about consumer behavior for a second. Consumers want to have options. They want to have choices. And I think what's happening is, let's say the service is not great, for example, but all of a sudden you feel committed or you feel as though you must provide some type of tip. And I think that's where a little bit of cognitive dissonance comes in for the consumer, from a consumer perspective. It's going to be interesting to see what happens moving forward.
Yeah, and there's also different ways to tip, right? You have the classical tip jar. I mean, I don't know if I don't carry cash anymore, but you certainly see those filling up in cafes. You have, the receipt that you sign when you sit down at a restaurant, and you have these digital interfaces. So that probably also changes behavior depending on the situation as well.
I think it does change behavior because, again, to the consumer, it feels like the expectation has to be that I must do something. I want to argue that people ask me all the time, Mark, how do we solve this problem? What happens? What are the options? The bottom line is the service workers, the other employees should have their pay increased, right? It should be much more competitive. And some restaurants are beginning to talk about that in terms of paying the hourly wages for the employees. Take that away from the consumers, give that competitive wage to those employees, to those workers. But what's happened is that years ago when people started tipping, the wages were so low, as they still are, and that employees are saying, well, tip me because I have to pay my bills next month. And the consumers are saying, well, that's your restaurant's responsibility to obviously increase the wages so that you can live a much more comfortable life.
Right, and I think in COVID, this probably really came to the forefront too, paying people living wages. You see in other countries, like in Europe, for example, a lot of people are paid living wages. So you leave a couple euros on the table when you leave a restaurant. It's a totally different situation over there.
One of the reasons that you don't see that change here, we are inside the box. And a lot of times people are afraid to change. So the restaurants and other service industries, for example, are very comfortable. They don't want to change. And the fact is, they're afraid, what reaction will customers have on my business if all of a sudden I raise prices to cover the tips? So the bottom line is, it's comfortable. Keep it the way it is. The challenge is we're going to see more and more customers. I predict you will find more and more consumers pushing back. And I want to address one point briefly. You're absolutely spot on. We're in the vacation season. We're in the summertime. People are feeling good. They're outdoors. I was eating by the lake yesterday. I was feeling great. I got the bill. I said, oh, my goodness, I got to tip another 20%. So the vacation puts us in a different mindset, and certainly we may be more willing to spend more money.
Well, thank you for coming bright and early this morning after your trip up north. I hope you had a nice time.
I did.
And some really good food for thought this morning, Mark. Thank you.